They all laughed when a rich man adopted 5 black orphans, calling it a foolish mistake. They mocked him, they mocked the boys, and they thought it would all fall apart. But years later, everything changed. The same people who ridiculed them now stand at their doors begging for mercy, because those 5 brothers grew up to hold the power to save lives, or watch their town fall. What happened to turn outcasts into heroes? And when their enemies come crawling back, will the brothers choose forgiveness or justice? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Millbrook's empty streets, its golden rays touching the imposing Ellis mansion that stood like a silent guardian at the town's edge. Inside, William Ellis's footsteps echoed through the corridor, his weathered face reflecting in the glass of countless dust-covered portraits. Each frame held memories of Evelyn, his beloved wife, her gentle smile forever frozen in time. William paused before her largest portrait, his hand trembling slightly as he reached out to touch the frame. Evelyn's kind eyes seemed to look right through him, stirring memories of her passionate speeches about the foster home she'd run with such dedication. "My dear," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I've failed you. All those children you cared for." The mansion's emptiness pressed in around him, a reminder of all he'd lost. With a heavy sigh, William pulled a small bell rope, its gentle chime breaking the afternoon stillness. Samuel Price, his estate manager, appeared promptly, his pressed suit a stark contrast to William's weary appearance. "The foster home, Samuel," William said quietly. "What's become of it?" Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the situation is dire. Donations have nearly stopped completely. Without immediate intervention, they'll have to close their doors within the month." William's jaw tightened as he turned back to Evelyn's portrait. Her dream was crumbling, and he'd done nothing to prevent it. Across town in the rundown foster home, Director Clara Thompson sat at her desk, surrounded by spreadsheets and dwindling supply lists. The building's worn walls and scuffed floors told the story of years of tight budgets and making do. In the corner of the main room, 5 brothers huddled together. Tyler, the eldest at 10, sat protectively close to his siblings. Mason and Caleb were sharing a tattered science book, while Evan and Liam pressed together, working on a puzzle with missing pieces. Their quiet determination to stay together was visible in every shared look and gentle touch. Ruth Adams, the social worker, stood by Clara's desk, her voice low but firm. "Clara, you know we can't keep them together forever. No family has the resources or desire to take all 5. We have to be realistic." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she watched the boys. "They're all they have, Ruth. You can't separate them. It would destroy them." Tyler's head snapped up at their whispered conversation, his young face hardening with worry. He could read the concern in their expressions. Leaning close to Mason and Caleb, he whispered, "Don't worry. I won't let them split us up. We stick together no matter what." Evan and Liam looked up from their puzzle, their small hands clasped tightly together, eyes wide with fear. Liam, the youngest, pressed closer to Evan, seeking comfort in his brother's presence. As evening approached, William Ellis stood at his study window, watching the sun sink behind the trees. Evelyn's voice seemed to whisper in his mind, as clear as if she were standing beside him. "Those children need love, William. They need hope." Unable to bear the weight of memory and regret any longer, William pressed the intercom button. "Harold, bring the car around. There's somewhere I need to go." As Harold Barnes pulled the sleek black car to the front of the mansion, William took one last look at Evelyn's portrait. The grand house felt emptier than ever, its silence heavy with years of inaction and missed opportunities. But tonight, something had to change. Tonight, he would see what remained of Evelyn's legacy with his own eyes. The early morning sun crept through the foster home's worn curtains, casting pale light across the cramped bedroom where the 5 brothers stirred from sleep. Tyler, already awake, watched over his siblings with protective eyes as they began their daily routine. "Hey Mason," Tyler called softly, pulling a broken radio from beneath his bed. "Want to see if you can fix this today? Might keep our minds busy." Mason's eyes lit up at the sight of the old radio, his fingers already itching to explore its inner workings. "Maybe we can get some music playing," he whispered, careful not to wake the other children in nearby rooms. Caleb sat cross-legged on his thin mattress, absorbed in a worn science booklet he'd discovered in a box of donations. His curious mind devoured each page, even though he'd read it countless times before. "Did you know," Evan piped up, trying to lighten the mood, "that if you spell mom upside down, it spells wow?" His attempt at humor brought small smiles to his brothers' faces, exactly what he'd hoped for. Downstairs, Liam helped Clara Thompson set the table for breakfast, carefully placing chipped plates and mismatched utensils. His small hands moved with gentle precision, making sure everything was just right despite their meager supplies. "Thank you, Liam," Clara said softly, ruffling his hair. "You're such a good helper." The sudden crunch of gravel outside made everyone freeze. Through the window, they watched a sleek black car pull up to the foster home. Clara Thompson's eyes widened in recognition, and Ruth Adams, who had just arrived for her morning visit, nearly dropped her clipboard. "Is that William Ellis?" Ruth whispered in disbelief. The five brothers crept to the hallway corner, peeking around it with curious eyes. They watched as the tall, distinguished man entered the building, his presence filling the shabby entrance hall with an air of authority. In the small living room, William Ellis stood rigid, his gaze traveling over the peeling wallpaper and empty spaces that once echoed with children's laughter. His eyes lingered on the old piano in the corner, where Evelyn used to sit and sing to the children. The memory seemed to physically pain him. Clara Thompson gathered her courage, her hands clasped tightly together. "Mr. Ellis, I'm afraid we'll have to close soon. We've tried everything, but..." William Ellis merely nodded, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness as he surveyed the room. Ruth Adams stepped forward, her voice gentle but professional. "There are 5 brothers here, Mr. Ellis. We've been trying to find them a home, but no one will take all of them together." William seemed lost in thought until movement caught his eye. The 5 boys had edged into the doorway, Tyler standing slightly in front of his brothers, his chin raised defiantly. Mason peered out from behind Caleb, while Evan tried to stand tall despite his obvious nervousness. Liam's eyes shone with unexpected hope as he gripped Evan's hand. William Ellis slowly knelt down, studying each brother in turn. He saw Tyler's protective stance, Mason's curious gaze, Caleb's quiet intelligence, Evan's brave smile, and Liam's gentle spirit. In that moment, Evelyn's words echoed in his mind with crystal clarity. No child should face the world alone. Without hesitation or explanation, William Ellis rose to his feet and made his announcement. "I'll adopt them. All 5 of them. Today." The room fell into stunned silence. Clara Thompson's mouth fell open, and Ruth Adams stood frozen, her clipboard forgotten in her hands. Outside the window, Harold Barnes, who had been waiting by the car, overheard the declaration and nearly dropped his driver's cap in shock. The 5 brothers exchanged startled glances, their expressions a mix of disbelief, hope, and uncertainty as they processed this unexpected turn of events. The morning sun streamed through the foster home's office window as Ruth Adams shuffled through adoption papers with practiced efficiency. Her fingers moved swiftly across forms, marking spots where William Ellis needed to sign. The small office felt cramped with so many people inside, but no one dared leave this momentous occasion. Clara Thompson stood in the corner, wringing her hands. Relief showed in her tired eyes, though uncertainty lingered in the way she watched the proceedings. William Ellis's pen scratched across paper after paper, his determined expression never wavering. In the hallway outside, Tyler gathered his brothers in a tight circle. "Listen," he whispered, his voice low and serious. "We can't trust this yet. Remember the Hendersons? They promised to take 2 of us, then changed their minds at the last minute." Mason nodded solemnly, while Caleb's usual curiosity seemed dampened by caution. Evan tried to smile, but even his natural optimism couldn't quite shine through. Liam pressed closer to his brothers, seeking comfort in their familiar presence. "We stick together," Tyler insisted, no matter what happens. Near the office window, William Ellis paused in his signing, his gaze distant. The morning light caught the silver in his hair as he wondered what Evelyn would think of his impulsive decision. Would she approve? Would she understand? As afternoon approached, curious neighbors began gathering outside the foster home. Their whispers carried across the quiet street, growing louder as more people joined the impromptu crowd. "Did you hear? William Ellis is adopting those 5 orphan boys," one woman said to another, her tone thick with disbelief. "All 5? He must have lost his mind," came the reply, followed by knowing snickers. Janet Mills, the local reporter, stood across the street with her camera ready. Her sharp eyes didn't miss a detail as she watched the scene unfold. This would make quite a story, the reclusive millionaire and his sudden adoption of 5 orphaned brothers. She could already envision the headlines. When William Ellis emerged with the boys, the crowd's whispers grew louder. Harold Barnes held the car door open as the brothers climbed in, their movements stiff with tension. Tyler kept his siblings close, ignoring the pointing and barely concealed laughter from onlookers. The mansion's massive foyer seemed to swallow the small group as they entered that evening. Their footsteps echoed off marble floors and high ceilings, making even Evan's usually cheerful voice fall silent. The boys huddled together, overwhelmed by the grandeur surrounding them. "Your rooms are this way," William Ellis said, leading them up the sweeping staircase. Each brother's eyes widened at the sight of their individual rooms, complete with new beds and furnishings. Yet Tyler's suspicious gaze never softened, even as his younger siblings explored their new spaces. Later, in his wood-paneled study, William Ellis sat across from Samuel Price. The estate manager's usual professional demeanor showed cracks of concern as he listened to his employer. "I failed her, Samuel," William Ellis admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "Evelyn begged me to help save the foster home years ago, but I was too focused on business, too proud to get involved." He paused, running a hand over his tired face. "These boys, they're my chance to make things right, to honor what she built, what she believed in." "The town will talk," Samuel Price warned gently. "Let them," William Ellis replied, his voice growing stronger. "I don't care what anyone thinks. These children deserve a chance, and I intend to give it to them. It's what Evelyn would have wanted." The morning sun cast long shadows through the mansion's tall windows, but the 5 brothers found no comfort in their luxurious surroundings. Tyler woke first, his body tense despite the softest mattress he'd ever slept on. The silence felt wrong. No creaking floors, no distant traffic, just emptiness. Stepping into the hallway, Tyler nearly jumped when he saw William Ellis standing there, dressed in a neat suit. The man's expression was gentle, but Tyler's guard remained up. "Did you sleep well?" William Ellis asked softly. Tyler managed a stiff nod, then quickly looked away. The plush carpet beneath his feet felt foreign, making him miss the foster home's worn wooden floors. In the formal dining room, the brothers gathered around a table that seemed to stretch forever. A feast lay before them. Fresh fruits, warm pastries, eggs prepared 3 different ways, and dishes they'd never seen before. Mason picked up a silver fork, turning it over in his hands with fascination, studying its intricate pattern. Caleb cautiously sampled an unfamiliar cheese, his analytical mind noting its texture and taste. "The chef can prepare anything you'd like," William Ellis offered, trying to break the ice. "Do you have favorite foods?" Evan attempted a smile, nudging Liam, who sat beside him. "We used to love Miss Clara's oatmeal cookies," he ventured quietly. "They were burnt sometimes," Liam added with a tiny giggle, but quickly fell silent when Tyler shot him a warning look. William Ellis nodded, understanding their hesitation. He watched as the boys picked at their food, their movements careful and measured, as if afraid to make a mistake. The weight of unspoken words hung heavy in the air. By mid-morning, a group of tutors arrived, led by Grace Whitfield, a tall woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. William Ellis gathered the boys in the library, its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves making the room feel both grand and intimidating. "Education is the key to your future," William Ellis explained, gesturing to the tutors. "Each of you will have personalized lessons." Tyler stepped forward, his chin raised defiantly. "We never asked for this," he challenged, voice sharp with distrust. William Ellis met his gaze steadily. "I want you to have every opportunity," he replied, his tone calm but firm. "Every chance to become whatever you choose to be." The testing began immediately. Grace Whitfield and her colleagues worked with each boy individually, assessing their knowledge and abilities. Despite their initial reluctance, natural talents emerged. Mason solved complex puzzles with surprising ease, his mind quickly grasping spatial relationships. Caleb's eyes lit up during science questions, absorbing new concepts like a sponge. As afternoon light filled the mansion's small lounge room, the brothers huddled together on a plush sofa, speaking in hushed tones. "He's trying to change us," Tyler insisted, his voice tight with worry. "Make us into something we're not." Caleb adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. "Maybe he really wants to help us succeed," he suggested, "even if it feels strict." "The tutors seemed nice," Evan offered, while Liam nodded in agreement. Both younger boys looked torn between hope and uncertainty. Mason remained quiet, his thoughts drifting to the workshop he'd glimpsed earlier. Tools lined the walls there, screwdrivers, wrenches, and devices he longed to understand. His fingers itched to explore them. "We should watch him closely," Tyler finally decided, looking at each brother in turn. "See what he really wants from us." The others nodded, united in their cautious approach to their new guardian and this strange new life. The morning papers arrived at the mansion like arrows, each headline more cutting than the last. William Ellis sat in his study, the morning light casting shadows across the latest newspaper's bold print. "Eccentric millionaire buys a family?" His hands trembled slightly as he read Janet Mills's article, filled with quotes from townspeople who seemed eager to share their opinions. "Those boys will be spoiled rotten," one resident had declared. "Mark my words, they'll be impossible to handle in a month." "Poor man's lost his mind after his wife died," another suggested. "This is what grief does to people." William Ellis's jaw tightened as he read further. The article questioned his ability to raise 5 children, especially given his reputation as a recluse. Janet Mills had painted him as an oddity, a wealthy man playing at parenthood without any real understanding of what it meant. Setting down the paper, William Ellis rubbed his temples. The criticism stung more than he'd expected. He rose from his desk and walked to the garden, seeking refuge among Evelyn's beloved roses. The morning air was crisp, but he barely noticed as he paced the stone paths. Inside the mansion's vast library, the afternoon tutoring session was in full swing. Tyler sat at a corner desk, his posture rigid as he half-heartedly worked on his assignments. Nearby, Mason had dismantled a small clock, his fingers moving deftly as he explored its inner workings. Grace Whitfield watched with interest as he reassembled it with surprising skill. Caleb hunched over a biology textbook, completely absorbed in a chapter about cellular structure. His eyes sparkled with genuine curiosity as he took detailed notes. Across the room, Evan was immersed in a biography about a frontier doctor who had saved an entire town. Liam sat by a window, his math homework forgotten as he watched birds outside, imagining ways he could help others like the characters in his storybooks. Grace Whitfield gathered her observations and sought out William Ellis in his study. "The boys show remarkable potential," she reported, her voice warm with enthusiasm. "Mason has an intuitive understanding of mechanics. Caleb's grasp of scientific concepts is well beyond his years. Even Tyler, when he allows himself to engage, shows strong leadership qualities." William Ellis nodded solemnly. "Spare no expense in their education," he instructed. "Even if they resent me for pushing them now, they deserve every opportunity to excel." As evening approached, Tyler caught William Ellis alone in the hallway. The boy's stance was defensive, but his eyes held determination. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded. "Why act so distant, and then push us so hard with all these lessons?" William Ellis paused, considering his words carefully. "I've never raised children," he admitted, his voice heavy with honesty. "Evelyn, she knew how to connect with young hearts. I'm trying to honor her memory, but I'm terrified of failing you all." Tyler's expression softened slightly. "We've been abandoned before," he revealed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every time someone shows interest, they eventually leave." "I won't abandon you," William Ellis promised firmly. "Let them laugh. Let them mock our situation. I made a commitment to you boys, and I intend to keep it." Around the corner, 4 pairs of eyes widened as they listened. Mason exchanged glances with Caleb, while Evan squeezed Liam's hand. Their guardian's words rang with sincerity, offering a tiny spark of hope that perhaps William Ellis was more than just their stern benefactor. The early morning sun crept through the mansion's windows as Caleb sat cross-legged on the floor of William Ellis's study. He had discovered a drawer filled with leather-bound notebooks, their pages covered in Evelyn Ellis's neat handwriting. His fingers traced the sketches of a medical center, complete with detailed notes about helping sick children who couldn't afford care. "Tyler," Caleb whispered urgently as his oldest brother passed by. "Look at these." Tyler knelt beside him, his usual guardedness softening as he examined the drawings. The notebooks revealed plans for examination rooms, a children's ward, and even a research laboratory. Evelyn Ellis's passion jumped from every page through her careful annotations and heartfelt observations about the town's medical needs. "She wanted to build something amazing," Tyler murmured, studying the detailed plans. His eyes lingered on notes about providing care to those who needed it most. For the first time, he wondered if William Ellis's strict emphasis on their education wasn't just about control. Maybe it was about continuing something bigger. Later that afternoon, the mansion's workshop buzzed with quiet concentration. Mason sat surrounded by radio parts, his nimble fingers working methodically. He'd managed to repurpose several components into a crude but functional device for measuring vital signs. The prototype was rough, but his eyes shone with pride at his creation. William Ellis appeared in the doorway, observing silently. A slight smile crossed his face as he watched Mason test the device. "You have quite a talent," he said softly, causing Mason to jump. Instead of scolding him for taking apart the radio, William Ellis crossed to a locked cabinet and opened it, revealing professional tools. "These might help you work more precisely." Mason's eyes widened at the gleaming instruments. "Really?" he asked, hardly daring to believe it. In another room, Evan and Liam sat together on a window seat, taking turns reading from a book about medical pioneers. "Listen to this one," Evan said excitedly. "This doctor treated people during an epidemic, even when everyone else ran away." "That's what being a doctor means," Liam replied thoughtfully. "Helping people when they need it most." Tyler appeared in the doorway, watching his younger brothers with protective fondness. "Remember, though," he said, stepping into the room, "whatever we become, we're brothers first. That's what matters most." As evening settled over the mansion, the family gathered around the dining table. William Ellis attempted to engage them about their studies. His usual formality slightly softened. Mason, encouraged by the earlier workshop interaction, proudly displayed his prototype. "I used the radio parts to make something that could help check people's heartbeats," he explained, his voice gaining confidence. "And we found these," Caleb added quietly, placing Evelyn Ellis's notebooks on the table. "They're full of plans for helping sick children." Tyler looked directly at William Ellis. "Why did she care so much about helping sick kids?" he asked bluntly. William Ellis set down his fork, emotion flickering across his usually stoic face. "Evelyn believed that every person deserved care and dignity, regardless of their circumstances," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "She saw how many children suffered because their families couldn't afford medical treatment. He paused, collecting himself. "She had such beautiful dreams of changing that. I failed her by not supporting those dreams while she was alive." The brothers exchanged glances across the table. Though their wariness remained, something in William Ellis's raw honesty touched them. For the first time, they glimpsed the deep well of love and regret that drove his actions, suggesting their benefactor might be more than just a distant authority figure. The crisp morning air filled the mansion's newly furnished study room. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating shelves of carefully selected books and educational materials. Grace Whitfield had arranged the room thoughtfully, creating separate areas for each brother's emerging interests. Tyler led his brothers into the room, their footsteps no longer hesitant on the polished floors. Each boy gravitated naturally to different sections. Caleb's fingers traced the spines of medical chemistry texts, his eyes lighting up at titles about molecular biology and pharmaceutical research. He pulled out a thick volume and settled into a cushioned window seat, already lost in its pages. Mason barely contained his excitement as he discovered engineering manuals filled with detailed diagrams. He spread them across a large desk, muttering calculations under his breath as he studied designs for medical equipment. His notebook quickly filled with sketches and ideas. At another table, Tyler immersed himself in leadership biographies, reading about great minds who changed the world through vision and determination. He occasionally glanced up to check on his brothers, his protective instincts never fully at rest. Evan and Liam sat together on a comfortable couch, sharing books about pediatric care and patient psychology. Evan pointed out passages about bedside manner, while Liam absorbed information about comforting scared children during treatment. William Ellis stood in the doorway, his tall frame casting a long shadow. His face softened as he watched the boys pursue their interests with such natural enthusiasm. He wanted to join them, to share in their discoveries, but held back, afraid his presence might disrupt their comfort. Instead, he turned to Grace Whitfield, who stood nearby with her lesson plans. "They need more," he said quietly. "Expand their curriculum. Focus on problem-solving skills and compassion in healthcare. Let them explore these interests fully." Grace nodded, already making notes. "They're remarkable students," she whispered. "Each one shows such natural aptitude in their chosen areas." Later that afternoon, sunshine warmed the mansion's garden as the brothers gathered around a stone bench. Mason proudly displayed his latest creation, a simple device cobbled together from spare parts. "It measures heart rates," he explained, demonstrating by placing it against Evan's wrist. The crude meter ticked steadily, matching Evan's pulse. "That's amazing," Liam exclaimed, reaching for the device. The brothers took turns testing it on each other, their laughter echoing across the garden. "Maybe we really will save lives someday," Evan joked, but his voice held a note of genuine hope. William Ellis approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt their moment of joy. He carried several medical journals in his arms. "I thought these might interest you," he said, placing them on the bench. "I've subscribed to several publications. They might help you understand more about current medical practices." Tyler looked up, surprise crossing his face. "You subscribe to these for us?" Liam stepped forward, his shy smile genuine. "Thank you for thinking of us," he said softly. As evening settled over the mansion, the family gathered in the grand dining room. The usual tension had eased, replaced by a comfortable quiet broken by occasional questions. The boys, growing more confident, asked about Evelyn Ellis. William Ellis set down his fork, his voice gentle as he shared memories. "She had this vision," he explained, "of creating a center where young people could learn to serve others through healthcare. She wanted to train the next generation to help those who couldn't afford proper medical care." He paused, regret crossing his features. "I was too focused on business success. I didn't listen when she asked for help to make it happen. I chose profit over her dream of helping others." Tyler listened intently, understanding flickering in his eyes as he recognized the weight of guilt William Ellis carried. Around the table, the brothers exchanged glances, beginning to see how their own growing interests in medicine and healthcare aligned with Evelyn Ellis's unrealized vision. The evening meal continued, a new understanding settling over the family like a gentle blanket. Each person at the table sensed they were part of something larger than themselves, something that had begun years ago in the heart of a woman who dreamed of helping others. The morning air held a sharp chill as William Ellis unfolded the local newspaper at his mahogany desk. His jaw tightened as he read the headline, "Ellis's Junior Doctors, Rich Man's Latest Folly." The article, dripping with sarcasm, questioned whether 5 orphaned boys could ever amount to anything in medicine. Janet Mills had done her work thoroughly, interviewing several prominent townspeople. Their quotes stung with dismissal. "He's wasting his money. They'll never become real doctors." Another resident sneered. "Those boys belong in trade school, not pretending to be physicians." William Ellis's hands crumpled the paper's edges. He'd expected skepticism, but the town's outright mockery felt personal. Setting the paper aside, he rang for Samuel Price. When his estate manager arrived, William Ellis stood at the window, watching the boys study in the garden. "Samuel, that empty garage near the east wing, I want it converted into a basic laboratory. Nothing fancy, but proper equipment for safe experiments. Mason needs space for his prototypes, and Caleb requires a proper area for his chemistry work." Samuel Price nodded thoughtfully. "I'll arrange it immediately, sir, but the town's talk." "Let them talk," William Ellis interrupted, his voice firm. "These boys will prove themselves through actions, not words." By afternoon, the garage transformation was underway. Clean white walls replaced the dingy interior, and proper lighting illuminated new workbenches. Mason and Caleb could hardly contain their excitement as they arranged microscopes, test tubes, and basic medical equipment. Evan and Liam worked as a team, methodically washing each instrument before placing it in its designated spot. Their careful attention to cleanliness showed a natural understanding of medical protocols. Meanwhile, Tyler sat cross-legged in a corner, deeply absorbed in an old medical dictionary, occasionally making notes about terms he wanted to research further. Grace Whitfield observed from the doorway, clipboard in hand. She watched Mason expertly calibrate a measurement device, while Caleb accurately mixed a simple saline solution. The boys moved with surprising confidence, as if they'd always belonged in such an environment. "Mr. Ellis," she reported later, finding him in the library, "these aren't just bright children playing doctor. There's something remarkable here. Mason intuitively understands mechanical principles that most adults struggle with. Caleb has an almost photographic memory for chemical compounds. Even young Liam shows an extraordinary empathy that could make him an exceptional pediatrician someday." As evening settled over the mansion, William Ellis paced his study's length, his footsteps heavy with thought. The boy's potential was clear, but would raw talent be enough? He paused at his desk, staring at a list of former medical colleagues, respected doctors who might mentor the boys. Samuel Price entered with the evening mail, observing his employer's restlessness. "Sir, perhaps we shouldn't rush external validation. Let the boys grow at their own pace." "But the ridicule they face?" William Ellis began. "We'll teach them resilience," Samuel finished gently. "True respect isn't granted overnight." William Ellis sank into his leather chair, nodding slowly. "You're right, of course." He glanced at Evelyn's portrait on the wall, her kind eyes seeming to watch over them all. They deserve a chance to prove who they can become, just like Evelyn wanted. Through the study window, he could see light still glowing from the new lab, where the boys remained engrossed in their work, undaunted by what anyone might say about them. The morning sun streamed through the lab's windows, casting long rectangles of light across the clean workbenches. Mason's tongue poked out slightly as he adjusted the calibration on his latest prototype, a simple device for measuring blood pressure. His careful movements showed weeks of practice handling delicate equipment. Nearby, Caleb bent over his notebook, methodically recording the properties of common medicinal herbs. Several small glass vials lined his workspace, each labeled in his precise handwriting. Tyler moved between his brothers, offering encouragement and checking their progress like a seasoned supervisor despite his young age. "Try tightening that valve just a quarter turn more," Tyler suggested to Mason, who nodded and made the adjustment. "Caleb, what did you discover about that feverfew sample?" Outside the lab's windows, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered at the property's edge. They whispered among themselves, necks craning to see inside. Mrs. Peterson, who had once loudly doubted the boys' abilities, found herself surprised by their dedication. "Look at how focused they are," she murmured to her companion. "I never expected such discipline from children their age." "Perhaps we were too quick to judge," another neighbor admitted, watching Mason successfully test his device on Evan's arm. The afternoon brought a special visitor to the mansion. Grace Whitfield introduced Dr. Marianne Foster, her silver hair neatly pinned back, her kind eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. The retired physician had known Evelyn Ellis years ago and shared her vision for community healthcare. "Now then," Dr. Foster began, spreading an anatomical chart across the table. "Who can tell me the 4 chambers of the heart?" Liam's hand shot up first, surprising everyone with his quick answer. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Foster guided them through basic anatomy lessons. She demonstrated proper hand-washing techniques, explaining how many lives could be saved through simple hygiene. The boys absorbed everything eagerly, asking intelligent questions that made her smile. After the lesson, Dr. Foster found William Ellis in his study. "Those boys," she said, shaking her head in wonder. "They remind me of eager interns. Their hearts are in the right place. Keep nurturing that." William Ellis's shoulders relaxed slightly at her words. "You truly think they have potential?" "More than potential," she assured him. "They have passion." As evening settled over the mansion, Caleb made an extraordinary discovery in the library. Hidden behind some medical texts was a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. His hands trembled as he recognized Evelyn Ellis's handwriting. "Tyler," he called softly, "come look at these." The brothers gathered around as Tyler carefully unfolded the first letter. His voice grew thick with emotion as he read Evelyn's words. "I dream of a day when children who have known loss might become the very ones who heal others. Our community needs more than just doctors. It needs healers who understand suffering firsthand." Evan wiped his eyes while Liam squeezed his hand. Mason sat very still, his latest prototype forgotten in his pocket. Caleb traced Evelyn's signature with gentle fingers. "She knew," Tyler whispered. "Somehow she knew exactly who we could become." In the hallway, William Ellis stood motionless, listening to the boys' quiet conversation. His heart swelled as he heard them promise each other to fulfill Evelyn's dream, no matter what obstacles they faced. Though they couldn't see him, tears slid down his cheeks as he realized how perfectly these 5 brothers embodied everything his wife had hoped for. Years later, the early morning light painted soft shadows across the mansion's halls as spring turned to summer. Months of dedicated study had left their mark on the 5 brothers, each showing subtle signs of growth. Tyler, his shoulders straighter now, sat at a desk carefully organizing their daily schedule into neat columns. His handwriting had improved, matching his growing confidence as the eldest. In the lab, Mason hunched over his workbench, his fingers more sure and steady, as he adjusted the dials on his latest blood pressure monitor. The prototype looked more refined than his earlier attempts, with clean soldering and precise measurements. Nearby, Caleb methodically labeled test tubes containing basic medical compounds, his eyes sharp behind new reading glasses as he recorded his observations. Down the hall, Evan and Liam sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by first aid manuals. They practiced wrapping bandages on each other, their movements becoming more natural with each attempt. Liam's gentle touch had grown more assured, while Evan's natural warmth helped him master the art of keeping patients calm. William Ellis stood at his study window, watching the boys through the reflection of morning light. Gone were the frightened, defensive children who first entered his home. In their place, he saw young minds thirsting for knowledge, working together with growing purpose. His heart swelled as he noticed how they moved around each other with easy familiarity, no longer jumping at sudden sounds or hiding from his presence. That afternoon, a clatter from the kitchen broke the usual quiet. Harold Barnes had been preparing fruit for the boys' afternoon snack when the knife slipped, leaving a deep cut across his palm. His sharp intake of breath brought all 5 brothers running. "Let us help," Tyler said firmly, already reaching for the first aid kit they'd assembled months ago. Mason quickly assessed the wound while Caleb prepared antiseptic solution. Evan spoke soothingly to Harold, explaining each step they would take, while Liam gathered clean towels and fresh bandages. "This might sting a bit," Caleb warned as he cleaned the cut. Harold Barnes nodded, impressed by their professional manner. The brothers worked in perfect synchronization. Mason held the wound closed while Tyler applied butterfly bandages. Evan kept Harold distracted with gentle conversation, and Liam monitored for any signs of dizziness. Within minutes, Harold's hand was properly cleaned and bandaged. "Well, I never," Harold said, examining their handiwork. "You boys handled that like real doctors. Thank you." William Ellis, drawn by the commotion, stood in the doorway watching. Pride filled his chest as he observed their careful attention to proper medical procedure. These were no longer just theoretical lessons. They were putting their knowledge to practical use. That evening, the dining room hummed with animated discussion as the family gathered for dinner. The long table that had once felt so formal now felt warm and inviting. The brothers excitedly discussed a medical journal article about new treatments for common illnesses. "The way they described the body's immune response was fascinating," Caleb said, gesturing with his fork. "And the practical applications could help so many people," Evan added, while Liam nodded enthusiastically. William Ellis cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice warm. "I've arranged for additional specialized tutors to join us, experts in biology, chemistry, and medical research. They'll help prepare you for proper medical certification in the future." Tyler looked up, his eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you," he said softly. "Not just for the tutors, but for believing we could do this, for giving us a chance when nobody else would." The other brothers murmured their agreement, and William Ellis felt his throat tighten. The distance that had once existed between them had melted away, replaced by something stronger: trust, respect, and genuine affection. A full year had passed, bringing changes both subtle and profound. On a bright morning, the 5 Ellis brothers walked down the town's main street, their steps measured and confident. They were no longer the scared orphans who had first arrived at William Ellis's mansion. Now, in their early teens, each carried himself with quiet dignity. As they passed familiar storefronts, Tyler noticed the shift in people's reactions. Some townspeople still whispered behind their hands, but others offered tentative nods of acknowledgement. Mrs. Peterson, who ran the bakery, even smiled as they passed her window. The bell above Ms. Ruth Delgado's bookstore chimed as they entered. The shop smelled of paper and leather bindings, shelves stretching from floor to ceiling. Ms. Delgado looked up from her counter, her usual skepticism giving way to curiosity as she watched the boys move purposefully toward the medical section. Advanced Cardiac Care, Essential Pharmacology, Medical Ethics and Practice. Caleb read the title softly, running his finger along the spines. Mason picked up a thick volume on biomedical engineering, while Evan and Liam examined texts on pediatric care. Ms. Delgado approached them cautiously. "Those are rather advanced materials," she commented, expecting to find them merely pretending interest. "Yes, ma'am," Tyler replied politely. "We're particularly interested in the latest research on preventative medicine." He pointed to specific chapters, discussing their relevance with such knowledge that Ms. Delgado's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. Later that afternoon, sunlight streamed through the windows of the mansion's converted laboratory. Mason adjusted the calibration on his latest diagnostic tool, a more sophisticated version of his early prototypes. Nearby, Caleb carefully measured nutrient samples, recording his observations in neat columns. "Blood sugar levels show marked variation based on dietary intake," Caleb muttered, comparing his results to established medical data. Tyler nodded approvingly as he supervised their work. At the other end of the lab, Evan sat in a chair while Liam practiced patient consultation techniques. "Now tell me about your symptoms," Liam said professionally, while Evan played the role of someone with respiratory issues. William Ellis stood in his study, holding a letter from Princeton Medical School. The dean had responded positively to his inquiries about future mentorship programs for gifted young students. His eyes crinkled with pride as he read the encouraging words about potential opportunities for the boys. As evening settled over the mansion, the brothers gathered in the warm parlor. Spread across the table were Evelyn Ellis's notebooks, their pages worn but their vision clear. Tyler traced his finger along her sketches of a community medical center, understanding now what she had dreamed of creating. "Look at these plans," Tyler said to his brothers. She wanted to build something that would help everyone regardless of their circumstances. When we're ready, when we've learned enough, we could make this real. The floor creaked softly as William Ellis entered the parlor. He placed a gentle hand on Tyler's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "That was Evelyn's dream," he said softly. "If you're willing, I'll help you make it real." The brothers exchanged glances, their eyes bright with purpose. In that moment, they weren't just students or orphans or even adopted sons. They were the future Evelyn Ellis had envisioned, finally taking shape. The morning sun had barely risen when Dr. Ernest Miller arrived at the mansion. His credentials from Johns Hopkins Medical School impressed even William Ellis, who watched from the back of the converted study as the distinguished physician began his lecture. "Diagnosis is the cornerstone of effective treatment," Dr. Miller explained, his voice carrying authority and wisdom. "You must learn to see patterns, to understand symptoms as pieces of a larger puzzle." The brothers sat attentively, their notebooks open. Caleb raised his hand first, asking about the relationship between blood chemistry and disease progression. Mason followed with questions about diagnostic equipment limitations, while Tyler inquired about triage protocols. Evan and Liam focused their questions on patient care and comfort during treatment. Dr. Miller's eyebrows rose with each thoughtful query. He glanced at William Ellis, who stood quietly in the shadows, his eyes glistening with pride as he remembered the frightened boys he'd first met at the foster home. That afternoon, Dr. Foster led the brothers through the town's only clinic. The small facility smelled of antiseptic and worry. They observed as she treated various patients: a child with a high fever, an elderly man with an infected cut, a young mother showing signs of malnutrition. "We're drastically understaffed," Dr. Foster explained, showing them the clinic's meager supply closet. Tyler noted the empty shelves where basic medicines should have been. Caleb shook his head at the outdated equipment. "This infection could have been prevented with proper care," Caleb whispered to Tyler as they watched Dr. Foster clean the elderly man's wound. Mason studied the broken blood pressure monitor, already mentally designing improvements. Back at the mansion that evening, the brothers gathered in the study. "Did you see how many people needed help?" Evan asked, his voice heavy with concern. Liam nodded, still thinking about the feverish child they'd observed. "The town needs more than just doctors," Tyler said. "It needs a proper medical facility." William Ellis entered, carrying a leather portfolio. "Evelyn thought the same thing," he said softly, spreading architectural drawings across the desk. The yellowed papers showed detailed plans for a modern medical center, complete with treatment rooms, a laboratory, and a pharmacy. "These were your mother's drawings," William Ellis explained, "and I'll make sure you have everything you need to make them reality. The best education, research facilities, whatever it takes." The brothers studied the plans, their faces illuminated by purpose. They understood the path ahead would be challenging, but they were no longer afraid. They had found their calling in Evelyn Ellis's dream. Early morning sunlight streamed through the mansion's library windows as the brothers hunched over their medical texts. Their teenage faces showed intense concentration, a far cry from the uncertain boys they'd once been. Dr. Ernest Miller cleared his throat, drawing their attention from their studies. "I have news that might interest you," he announced, holding up an official-looking document. "There's an opportunity for preliminary accreditation exams. These would give you formal recognition as medical trainees." Tyler's eyes lit up immediately. Mason straightened in his chair while Caleb closed his book with careful precision. Evan and Liam exchanged excited glances. "When can we take them?" Tyler asked, his voice steady but eager. William Ellis stood quietly by the doorway, pride and anxiety mixing in his expression as he watched his sons embrace this new challenge. Later that afternoon, the converted garage lab hummed with activity. The brothers had transformed it into a modest clinic, complete with basic medical equipment and supplies. The unexpected arrival of Patrick Miller, a local farmer known for his previous mockery of their family, created a tense atmosphere. "Been coughing for weeks," Patrick admitted reluctantly, avoiding eye contact. His breathing came in wheezy gasps. Caleb led the examination, his movements precise and professional. "How long have you had the fever?" he asked, listening to Patrick's chest with a stethoscope. "About 3 days," Patrick mumbled. The brothers worked in seamless coordination. Caleb made his diagnosis while Tyler prepared the treatment plan. Mason checked Patrick's vitals with equipment he'd modified himself. Evan and Liam ensured their patient remained comfortable despite his obvious discomfort with their care. "Early-stage pneumonia," Caleb announced, "and we can treat this." Patrick's skepticism showed clearly on his face, but as the prescribed antibiotics and care began to ease his breathing, his expression softened. "Thank you," he said gruffly, surprising them all. That evening, Tyler and Mason sat in the study, surrounded by exam requirement documents. William Ellis watched them from his desk. "These exams," William Ellis said softly, "they'll help silence those who doubt you." Tyler nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. The brothers exchanged determined looks, knowing this wasn't just about passing tests. It was about proving themselves worthy of Evelyn Ellis's vision. "We won't let you down," Tyler promised, speaking for all of them. "Or Mom." William Ellis smiled, touched by Tyler's words. The brothers returned to their exam preparations with renewed purpose, ready to show the town that their knowledge and compassion were real. Early morning sunlight filtered through the library's tall windows as the brothers sat at their usual study table. Dr. Ernest Miller paced before them, firing questions about complex medical conditions. "What are the primary symptoms of bacterial pneumonia?" he asked. Caleb answered without hesitation, his voice steady and precise. Tyler followed with treatment protocols while Mason detailed the necessary monitoring equipment. Evan and Liam chimed in about patient care and comfort measures. Dr. Miller's stern expression softened into approval. He turned to William Ellis, who watched from near the doorway. "In all my years of teaching," he said quietly, "I've rarely seen such dedication in students this young." By midday, the brothers walked through the town marketplace wearing simple white coats that marked them as medical trainees. Their presence drew mixed reactions. Some townspeople still snickered behind their hands, while others watched with growing curiosity. Near the baker's shop, Franklin Reese, a merchant who had once openly mocked William Ellis's charity case, suddenly stumbled against his market stall. His face went pale as he gripped the wooden counter for support. The brothers moved as one. Tyler took charge while Mason checked vital signs. Caleb assessed symptoms as Evan and Liam helped Franklin sit safely. "Severe dehydration," Caleb announced. They worked together, offering clean water and proper care until Franklin's color returned. "Thank you," Franklin muttered, clearly embarrassed but sincere. Around them, the crowd watched in silent surprise at their calm efficiency. That evening in the mansion study, the brothers recounted the day's events to William Ellis and Grace Whitfield. Grace smiled warmly. "Every patient you help changes minds," she said. "I've seen how people look at you differently now." William Ellis cleared his throat, pulling out a familiar set of blueprints, Evelyn Ellis's original plans for a medical center. "I've contacted some architects," he said. "Perhaps it's time to revisit these." The brothers gathered around the old drawings, hope rising in their hearts. They understood now that each exam they passed, each patient they helped, built the trust they needed to make their mother's dream real. Morning sunlight streamed through the parlor windows as the brothers huddled around the large oak table with William Ellis and Samuel Price. Spread before them lay Evelyn Ellis's carefully drawn blueprints, their edges worn with age but her vision still clear on the yellowed pages. Tyler traced his finger along the outline of a classroom space. "We could teach others here," he said softly. "Local kids who want to learn medicine, just like us." Caleb leaned forward, adjusting his glasses as he studied the research wing. "Our little lab could grow into something bigger. Think of the discoveries we could make." Mason's eyes lit up as he sketched quick additions in his notebook. "I could design better diagnostic tools, maybe even create machines that make treatment easier." "And here," Evan pointed to a corner of the blueprint, with Liam nodding enthusiastically beside him, "we could make the children's ward bright and cheerful, so it feels less scary for the little ones." Later that afternoon, tension filled the makeshift lab as Tyler and Mason's voices rose in disagreement. "We need to focus on treating as many patients as possible," Tyler insisted, his jaw set firmly. "That's what matters most." Mason shook his head forcefully. "But my innovations could help us treat them better. We can't ignore technical progress." The other brothers watched nervously as the argument intensified. Finally, Caleb stepped between them, his voice calm but firm. Remember why we're doing this. Whether it's through direct care or new tools, we're all trying to help people. The words hung in the air for a moment before both Tyler and Mason's shoulders relaxed. Tyler extended his hand first. Your inventions will help us treat patients better. Mason took it, nodding. And you'll make sure everything I create serves the people who need it most. That evening, the family gathered around the dinner table, the earlier conflict resolved. William Ellis cleared his throat. I've been in contact with Riverside Construction. They're interested in helping fund and build the initial facility. The brothers exchanged excited glances, understanding that while the path ahead would be challenging, their unity would see them through. Samuel Price smiled approvingly as he watched the family's determination grow stronger. The morning sun painted long shadows across the hospital corridors as Dr. Mary Ann Foster led the Ellis brothers through the bustling facility. Now in their early 20s, they moved with quiet confidence, their eyes taking in every detail of this advanced medical environment. Mason studied the sophisticated diagnostic equipment with intense fascination, while Caleb took careful notes about the medication protocols. Evan and Liam observed the gentle way nurses handled frightened patients, and Tyler listened intently as doctors discussed complex cases during their rounds. Notice how they work as a team, Dr. Foster pointed out, watching the brothers absorb everything around them. When they returned home that afternoon, they found William Ellis in his study, looking unusually pale. He gripped his desk for support, trying to mask his discomfort, but 5 pairs of trained eyes caught the signs immediately. Father, please sit down, Tyler said firmly, helping William Ellis to his chair. Mason pulled out his latest heart monitor, a much improved version of his early prototype. Caleb began a rapid assessment of symptoms while Evan and Liam checked his blood pressure and breathing. Irregular heartbeat, Mason reported, his voice steady despite his concern. Tyler recalled his cardiovascular studies. His medication needs adjusting. The symptoms match what we learned about heart arrhythmia. Working together with practiced efficiency, they administered the proper emergency care. Within minutes, William Ellis's color improved and his breathing steadied. Later that evening, they gathered in his study. William Ellis sat in his favorite armchair, wrapped in a warm blanket, looking at his sons with tear-filled eyes. You saved my life today, he said softly. Evelyn would be so proud of what you've become, all of you. Evan adjusted the blanket while Liam checked William Ellis's pulse again. You gave us a chance when no one else would, Liam replied quietly. We'll always take care of you, Tyler promised, his brothers nodding in agreement. As they sat together, Samuel Price delivered a letter from Dr. Miller. Tyler read it aloud. Their accreditation exams were scheduled for the coming weeks. William Ellis smiled weakly but proudly at his sons, knowing they were ready for this next challenge. The town hall buzzed with nervous energy as the Ellis brothers set up their health workshop. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows, illuminating the small gathering of townspeople who had dared to attend. Some sat with arms crossed while others leaned forward with genuine interest. Liam moved among the crowd with his characteristic gentleness, demonstrating proper hand-washing techniques. His soft voice and patient explanations helped ease the tension in the room. Remember, he said, clean hands save lives. Evan's face lit up as he explained the importance of a balanced diet. Prevention is better than cure, he declared, showing charts of healthy food choices. His enthusiasm proved contagious, drawing reluctant smiles from even the most skeptical attendees. Tyler commanded attention at the front of the room, his clear instructions making complex medical concepts accessible. Mason and Caleb worked together, displaying their simple diagnostic tools and explaining basic first aid procedures. As the morning session concluded, Elise Carter, a young mother with worry lines creasing her forehead, approached them clutching her feverish child. He's been sick for days, she whispered. Nothing seems to help. The brothers exchanged concerned glances as they examined the child. Mason's monitoring device showed an unusually high temperature, while Caleb recorded detailed observations in his notebook. The child's symptoms didn't match typical fever patterns. We'll monitor him closely, Tyler assured Elise, his voice steady and professional. From across the room, William Ellis watched with quiet pride as townspeople gathered around his sons, asking questions and seeking advice. Later that evening, the library's warm lamplight cast long shadows as the brothers consulted with Dr. Ernest Miller. Books and medical journals lay scattered across the heavy wooden table. "The fever pattern is unusual," Caleb explained, showing Dr. Miller his detailed notes. Dr. Miller adjusted his spectacles, studying the information. "It appears to be a rare variant of a common virus," he said thoughtfully. "Not typically dangerous, but worth watching carefully." The brothers nodded, their faces serious but optimistic. They had successfully treated dozens of patients over the past months, earning small measures of trust with each case. "We'll continue monitoring all unusual cases," Tyler declared, while his brothers murmured in agreement. They organized their notes methodically, ready to face whatever medical challenges lay ahead. Early morning sunlight filtered through the mansion's windows as the brothers gathered around a letter from the Medical Accreditation Board. Their hands trembled slightly as they read that exam results would be announced within days. Tyler's jaw tightened, while Mason fiddled nervously with a nearby medical instrument. William Ellis placed a steadying hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Remember," he said softly, "these results don't define who you are or what you can accomplish." The brothers nodded, understanding his words, but still feeling the weight of anticipation. By afternoon, the quiet town square buzzed with activity. Construction workers in dusty overalls marked boundaries on an empty plot, the future site of their clinic. William Ellis stood back, watching as his investment in Evelyn's dream took physical form. Townspeople gathered at the edges of the construction site, their whispers carrying mixed emotions. Mrs. Thompson, the baker, nodded approvingly, while Mr. Roberts, the hardware store owner, maintained his characteristic frown. Tyler stepped forward, his voice clear and steady. "We know many of you still have doubts," he addressed the crowd, "but this clinic will serve everyone in our community, regardless of their past opinions or current beliefs. We ask only for the chance to prove ourselves through our work." His words hung in the air, and slowly heads began to nod. Even Mr. Roberts uncrossed his arms, a glimpse of respect crossing his weathered face. As evening settled over the mansion, lamplight spilled from the library windows. Inside, each brother immersed himself in preparation. Mason's hands moved deftly over his latest diagnostic tool, making minute adjustments. Caleb's forehead wrinkled in concentration as he studied complex medical cases in thick journals. Evan and Liam sat together, reviewing patient care protocols, while Tyler sketched out treatment plans for the new clinic. Their dedication filled the room with purposeful energy. A letter arrived from Dr. Foster praising their progress. Tucked within her encouraging words was a brief mention of an unusual illness appearing in distant towns. The brothers, absorbed in their immediate tasks, set the letter aside with only passing interest. Their focus remained fixed on the promise of tomorrow, the clinic's construction, their pending exam results, and the chance to finally prove themselves to the town that had doubted them for so long. Early morning light streamed through the mansion's windows as the brothers huddled around a sealed envelope from the Medical Accreditation Board. Their hands shook as Tyler carefully broke the wax seal. William Ellis stood nearby, his breath held. "We passed," Tyler whispered, his voice growing stronger. "All of us, with high marks." The room erupted in joy. Mason grabbed Caleb in a tight embrace while Evan and Liam jumped up and down, tears streaming down their faces. William Ellis wrapped his arms around all 5 brothers, his own eyes brimming with tears. "Evelyn would be so proud," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've worked so hard for this moment." At the construction site that afternoon, walls rose steadily against the autumn sky. The brothers walked the grounds with Dr. Foster and Dr. Miller, pointing out where each section would be. "The pediatric ward will have large windows," Evan explained, gesturing to a partially framed area. "Children heal better with sunlight." Liam added, "And space for parents to stay with them." Dr. Foster nodded approvingly, but her expression grew serious. "There's something we need to discuss," she said, pulling out a letter. "We're receiving reports of a respiratory illness spreading in neighboring regions. It might be wise to prepare." What kind of illness? Caleb asked, medical curiosity piqued. Details are sparse, Dr. Miller added, but protection and supplies should be prioritized. That evening, in the mansion's warm parlor, the brothers gathered around a large desk with William Ellis. Tyler wrote carefully in his neat hand: masks, gloves, antiseptic solutions, fever reducers. Better to be prepared, Tyler said firmly, adding more items to the list. Caleb thumbed through medical journals, searching for similar cases. We need to understand what we might face. Mason sketched designs for additional ventilation systems. We should modify the clinic's airflow just in case. William Ellis pulled out his writing paper. I'll contact my colleagues in the affected regions. We need all the information we can get. The brothers worked late into the evening, their newly earned credentials giving weight to their preparations. Their joy at passing the exams mixed with determination to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Early morning sunlight filtered through the newly installed windows of the clinic wing. The brothers had set up a simple checkup booth, their medical certificates proudly displayed on the wall. A small line of townspeople waited patiently, some shifting nervously, others watching with curiosity. Liam greeted each person with a warm smile while Evan took detailed notes. Mason operated his diagnostic tools with practiced ease, explaining each step to fascinated onlookers. When Elise Carter arrived with her healthy child, her face beamed with gratitude. My little one hasn't had a fever since you treated him, she announced loudly enough for others to hear. These doctors knew exactly what to do. Several skeptical observers exchanged surprised glances, nodding with growing approval. In the afternoon, the atmosphere shifted when Georgina Hall entered, looking pale and tired. Tyler and Caleb led her to a private examination room. As they listened to her breathing and checked her vital signs, their expressions grew serious. How long have you had the cough? Tyler asked, sharing a knowing look with Caleb. About 3 days, Georgina replied between labored breaths. I just returned from visiting family in the northern region. Caleb carefully documented her symptoms: the persistent cough, unusual fatigue, and concerning shortness of breath. These aligned too closely with Dr. Foster's warnings to ignore. They quickly but calmly explained to Georgina and her family the need for isolation. We'll provide detailed instructions for home care, Tyler assured them, demonstrating proper hand-washing techniques and explaining quarantine procedures. Evening found the brothers gathered in the mansion's study with William Ellis and Dr. Miller. Mason's diagnostic equipment lay scattered across the desk while he prepared for sample testing. Evan and Liam sorted through patient records, looking for any similar patterns. The symptoms matched the reports from other regions, Dr. Miller observed, examining their notes on Georgina's condition. Tyler stood by the window drafting a letter to local authorities. We need to alert them, but without causing panic. William Ellis watched his son's work with a worried frown. Whatever comes, he said softly, remember that compassion must guide your actions. Your medical knowledge means nothing without it. The brothers nodded solemnly, each understanding the weight of their responsibility to the community that was finally beginning to trust them. Early morning sunlight cast long shadows across the clinic's main room as the brothers huddled around a growing pile of letters. Their faces grew more serious with each report they read aloud. William Ellis stood by the window, his shoulders tense as he held another envelope from a distant colleague. 3 doctors abandoned Millbrook yesterday, Tyler read, his voice steady but concerned. The hospital there can't keep up with new cases. Mason looked up from a different letter. Medicine shortages in Riverdale. They're rationing oxygen tanks. He glanced at their own modest supply closet, mentally calculating their resources. Caleb spread out several medical reports, his fingers tracing the growing pattern of infection across the region. The illness moves quickly through communities. Once it takes hold. His voice trailed off as Evan and Liam exchanged worried glances. Our neighboring towns are falling like dominoes, William Ellis said softly, passing another letter to Tyler. Old friends write that fear is spreading faster than the disease itself. The brothers absorbed this news in heavy silence. Sunlight crept across the floor as they studied maps and reports, the weight of responsibility settling on their shoulders. Their town sat like an island in a growing sea of illness, and they knew it was only a matter of time. By afternoon, their fears materialized in Georgina Hall's deteriorating condition. Her breathing had become labored, each intake of air a visible struggle. The isolation room felt thick with tension as Caleb and Evan worked quickly to set up oxygen support. "Try to take slow, deep breaths," Evan instructed gently while Caleb adjusted the flow rate. Mason stood nearby, his latest measuring device tracking Georgina's vital signs with quiet precision. "Heart rate elevated," Mason reported, his voice low. "Oxygen saturation dropping." Liam sat beside Georgina, holding her hand firmly. "You're doing great," he assured her, his presence steady and calming. "We're right here with you." Outside the clinic windows, a crowd had gathered. Some pressed their faces against the glass, watching the brothers work. These were the same townspeople who had once whispered cruel jokes about William Ellis's charity case doctors. Now they stood in anxious silence, their former mockery replaced by desperate hope. Tyler moved efficiently between the isolation room and the clinic's entrance, organizing staff and ensuring proper protective measures. He heard fragments of conversation from the crowd outside. "Never thought we'd need them so much. Thank God they stayed here. Please let them save her." Evening brought a sense of urgency to the mansion's grand dining room, now converted into a makeshift command center. Maps and medical texts covered the polished wooden table as the crisis committee convened. William Ellis sat at the head, flanked by Dr. Foster and Dr. Miller, while the brothers occupied the remaining seats. "We need to establish clear quarantine protocols," Dr. Foster said, reviewing their drafted plans. "The infection rate in other towns suggests we have very little time." Dr. Miller nodded grimly. "Most hospitals are already overwhelmed. We can't count on outside help." William Ellis watched his sons with a mixture of pride and fear. They had grown into capable doctors, but the scale of what they faced seemed overwhelming. "Perhaps we should send for additional medical staff," he suggested carefully. Dr. Foster shook her head. "Many physicians are fleeing to larger cities, believing they'll be safer there. Small towns like ours are being abandoned." The brothers exchanged determined looks across the table. They had spent years preparing to help their community. Now, facing the prospect of standing alone against an epidemic, they understood that everything they had learned would be tested. The early morning light barely touched the clinic's windows when the first new patients arrived. They came in small groups, each person displaying the now familiar symptoms: fevered faces, racking coughs, and the desperate struggle to draw breath. The brothers moved with practiced efficiency, their previous mockery by these same townspeople forgotten in the urgency of care. Mason hunched over his workbench, fingers flying as he assembled parts for a basic ventilation device. "I can modify these oxygen regulators," he muttered, reaching for his tools. "It won't be perfect, but it might help." Nearby, Caleb measured careful amounts of their dwindling medical supplies, attempting to create an antiviral mixture that might ease the symptoms. His face showed intense concentration as he consulted his notes and adjusted the compounds. Evan and Liam moved from bed to bed, their gentle voices providing comfort to frightened patients. "Try to stay calm," Evan soothed, adjusting a blanket. "Slow, steady breaths," Liam demonstrated, holding an elderly man's hand. Tyler stood at the entrance, clipboard in hand, making swift decisions about isolation needs. His calm authority helped maintain order as more townspeople arrived seeking help. The town's leadership council appeared mid-morning, their usual proud demeanor replaced by obvious fear. These were the same faces that had sneered at William Ellis's foolish charity project mere months ago. Now they stood hat in hand, practically begging for assistance. In the clinic's narrow corridor, William Ellis met with Mayor Richard Conway, whose face showed the strain of recent sleepless nights. "I was wrong about your family, Ellis," Conway admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "What you and the boys have built here, it's our only hope now." William Ellis felt no triumph at this confession, only a deep sadness. "We'll do everything we can," he assured Conway quietly. "But we need your help to protect the town." Conway nodded vigorously. "Whatever you need. I'll order all gatherings stopped, set up quarantine zones. Just tell me what to do." Evening found the mansion's laboratory bustling with activity. Caleb bent over his microscope, carefully documenting the effects of different medication combinations on collected samples. Mason's workspace was littered with parts and tools as he refined his oxygen delivery system. Tyler sat surrounded by patient charts looking for patterns that might help them get ahead of the disease's spread. Evan and Liam took turns checking on the quarantine ward, their dedication unwavering despite their exhaustion. Dr. Foster arrived as darkness fell, her expression grim as she delivered the news they'd feared. "I've contacted every major hospital within 100 miles. They're all overwhelmed. No one can spare any staff or supplies." The brothers exchanged determined looks, knowing they now stood alone between their town and disaster. Dawn crept over the clinic as tension filled its crowded halls. Georgina Hall's family huddled near the entrance, their faces drawn with worry as they watched the brothers work. 2 more patients had developed severe breathing difficulties overnight, their coughs echoing through the makeshift ward. Tyler moved methodically through patient files at the front desk, organizing treatment schedules and tracking symptoms. Nearby, Mason hunched over his workbench, carefully adjusting valves on his latest oxygen delivery device, his fingers steady despite his exhaustion. In the small laboratory section, Caleb measured precise amounts of his antiviral mixture, checking and rechecking his calculations. Evan and Liam worked in tandem, moving from bed to bed, offering water, adjusting pillows, and providing reassuring words to frightened patients. A small group of townspeople had gathered early, offering to help. Mrs. Baker, who once turned her nose up at the Ellis family, now quietly washed linens in the back room. Mr. Thompson, the local carpenter, distributed masks and demonstrated proper wearing technique to visitors. By afternoon, Dr. Ernest Miller stood in the lab, carefully reviewing test results from Caleb's antiviral treatments. His eyes brightened as he noted several patients showing slower disease progression. "It's not a cure," he explained, "but it's buying us precious time." Mason's modified oxygen device had helped stabilize Georgina Hall's breathing, bringing color back to her cheeks. The brothers exchanged quick glances across the ward, allowing themselves a moment of cautious hope. Outside the clinic, William Ellis paced the perimeter, his hand occasionally pressing against his chest. Despite warnings about his heart condition making him vulnerable to the illness, he refused to leave. "These are my sons," he said firmly when Dr. Miller suggested he return to the mansion. "I won't abandon them now." As evening approached, Tyler stood before a crowd gathered at the partially constructed wing of the new clinic. Though construction had slowed with workers falling ill, the framework stood as a testament to their future hopes. The eldest brother's voice carried clearly as he addressed the worried faces before him. "We understand your fear," Tyler said, his tone steady and reassuring. "But if we work together, follow proper hygiene protocols, and maintain isolation where needed, we can fight this." He detailed their preventive measures, explaining each step carefully. The crowd listened with rapt attention, their earlier skepticism replaced by desperate hope. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had once loudly questioned William Ellis's judgment in adopting 5 boys, wiped tears from her eyes. "Thank God for the Ellis family," she whispered, and others nodded in agreement. The early morning sun cast long shadows through the mansion windows as more patients arrived at the makeshift hospital. The brothers moved with practiced efficiency, their earlier training now tested by real crisis. Tyler directed volunteers to convert the mansion's grand dining room into another ward, while Mason installed his oxygen devices along the walls. In what was once the mansion's ballroom, rows of beds held coughing patients. Caleb moved between them, notebook in hand, documenting symptom patterns and treatment responses. His keen eyes noticed that younger patients showed different progression rates than the elderly, information that could prove vital. Evan and Liam worked in the children's ward, set up in the mansion's former music room. They had decorated the walls with cheerful drawings, trying to make the space less frightening for their young patients. Liam held a crying 6-year-old girl while Evan administered medicine, singing softly to distract her. In his makeshift office, Tyler frowned over inventory lists. Medical supplies dwindled faster than expected. He rationed carefully, knowing each decision could mean life or death for someone. The partially constructed medical center wing, though unfinished, now housed isolation cases, its bare walls echoing with labored breathing. The afternoon sun blazed when William Ellis stumbled in the hallway, clutching his chest. His face turned ashen as he collapsed against the wall. "Father!" Tyler's cry brought his brothers running. They carried William Ellis to the nearest empty bed, their hearts pounding with fear. Mason quickly attached his latest oxygen device while Caleb administered his experimental treatment. The brothers watched anxiously as William Ellis's breathing steadied, though he remained pale and weak. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "to distract you from your work." "Don't apologize," Evan said firmly, adjusting the pillows behind William Ellis's head. Liam held his hand tightly, tears in his eyes. "You gave us everything," Tyler added, his voice thick with emotion. "A home, an education, a purpose. We'll find a way to beat this disease, and you'll see Evelyn's dream come true. We promise." As evening fell, candles illuminated the mansion's study, now transformed into a research center. Dr. Foster spread medical journals across the large oak desk, while Dr. Miller examined telegrams from overseas colleagues. The brothers huddled around them, searching for answers. "This serum from London shows promise," Dr. Foster pointed to a detailed article. "But with shipping disrupted, we'll never get it in time," Dr. Miller finished grimly. Caleb studied the serum's composition intently. "These base compounds," he said thoughtfully, "we might find similar properties in local plants. The yellow wildflowers near the creek contain comparable anti-inflammatory properties." Mason leaned forward, sketching rapidly on a piece of paper. "If we could extract those compounds, I could modify my oxygen device to deliver the serum more effectively." "We'll need to monitor patients closely," Evan added, while Liam nodded, already drafting new care protocols. Through the candlelight, they worked tirelessly, driven by determination and the memory of William Ellis's collapse. Their medical journals cast long shadows on the walls as they raced against time to save their town and the man who had given them everything. The early morning light crept through the mansion's laboratory windows as the brothers gathered around a workbench, their faces drawn from lack of sleep. Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he held up a vial containing a pale amber liquid, the serum derived from local wildflowers and stable compounds. "The anti-inflammatory properties should help reduce the respiratory inflammation," Caleb explained, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Mason nodded, making final adjustments to his delivery device. "This will ensure the serum reaches deep into the airways," he said, demonstrating the mechanism's gentle misting action. In the recovery rooms, Evan and Liam moved efficiently, arranging fresh blankets and adjusting pillows. They knew comfort could make a crucial difference in healing. Tyler stood in the hallway, instructing volunteers on proper sanitation protocols and organizing them into shifts. As afternoon sunlight filtered through the clinic windows, tension filled the air. Georgina Hall lay struggling for breath, her chest heaving with effort. Other critical patients filled nearby beds, their labored breathing creating a haunting chorus. The brothers administered the serum carefully, Mason's device delivering a fine mist while Caleb monitored vital signs. Minutes stretched into hours as townspeople lingered nearby, their faces etched with worry and hope. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, Georgina Hall's breathing began to ease. The harsh rattling in her chest softened. Other patients showed similar subtle improvements, their fever-bright eyes growing clearer, their desperate gasps becoming less frequent. "It's working," whispered one of the volunteers, and the words spread through the ward like a ripple of hope. In the study that evening, lamplight illuminated the tired but determined faces of the medical team. Dr. Miller examined the patient charts with amazement. "What you've accomplished here," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "It's remarkable." William Ellis sat propped in an armchair, still weak but his eyes bright with pride as he watched his sons. Tyler spread out production plans on the desk, while Caleb made careful notes about dosage adjustments. Mason sketched modifications to his delivery device, determined to speed up production. "We'll need to make more," Tyler said, running calculations. "Much more." "The whole town needs access," Caleb agreed, adjusting his formulas. Dr. Foster reviewed their notes, adding her own observations about patient responses. The brothers gathered around the desk, ready to work through another sleepless night, knowing lives depended on their success. The morning sun cast long shadows through the mansion's windows as volunteers gathered in orderly lines, their faces showing determination rather than the fear that had gripped them days before. Tyler stood at the entrance, clipboard in hand, organizing groups of townspeople into distribution teams. His voice carried clear and steady across the foyer, giving precise instructions on how to reach each household. Mason worked methodically at a long table, assembling simple inhalation devices from available materials. His fingers moved swiftly, showing others how to connect the pieces properly. "The seal must be tight," he explained to a volunteer. "Otherwise, the serum won't reach deep enough into the lungs." In the laboratory wing, Caleb carefully measured exact portions of the precious serum, his movements precise and deliberate. He double-checked each ratio, knowing there was no room for error. Beside him, 2 local pharmacists watched intently, learning the process so they could assist with production. Evan and Liam moved among the volunteers, demonstrating proper bedside manner. "Speak softly," Liam advised, showing how to hold the inhalation device. "Many patients are frightened. They need gentle reassurance." "Remember to explain each step," Evan added, his kind eyes connecting with each volunteer. "It helps them feel more in control." The mansion's once quiet hallways now hummed with activity. People who had once whispered doubts about the brothers now listened attentively to their guidance, eager to help save their community. As afternoon approached, a sudden commotion erupted near William Ellis's study. He had collapsed while reviewing supply lists, his face ashen and breathing labored. The brothers dropped everything and rushed to his side. "His pulse is weak," Tyler announced, fingers pressed to his father's wrist. Mason quickly adjusted his latest oxygen device while Caleb prepared a dose of their serum. Evan and Liam supported William Ellis's head, helping him into a position to receive the treatment. William Ellis's eyes fluttered open as the serum took effect. He looked at each son in turn, his gaze filled with pride despite his weakness. "You've become everything she hoped," he whispered, referring to Evelyn. "You'll save them all. I know it." Those quiet words, though strained, filled the brothers with renewed purpose. They carefully helped William Ellis to his bed, ensuring he was comfortable before returning to their vital work. As evening settled over the clinic, Dr. Foster and Dr. Miller reviewed the latest patient records with growing optimism. The graphs showed a clear trend: fewer severe cases, slower disease progression, and most importantly, a dropping mortality rate. "The panic is subsiding," Dr. Foster noted, indicating the reduced number of emergency admissions. Dr. Miller nodded in agreement. "Your serum has changed everything. Patients who would have deteriorated rapidly are now holding steady." The brothers stood together near the clinic's entrance, exhaustion evident in their postures but relief shining in their eyes. Tyler pulled his younger siblings into a tight embrace, and they held on to each other, drawing strength from their unity. "We're not finished," Tyler reminded them, "but we've turned a corner." Caleb smiled tiredly. "The treatment protocol is working, we just need to stay the course." Mason, Evan, and Liam nodded in agreement, knowing their next steps would focus on careful monitoring and gradual rehabilitation of their patients. The town's recovery would take time, but they had found the key to ending the epidemic's deadly grip. Sunlight streamed through the clinic windows, casting warm patterns on the recovering patients' beds. The air, once heavy with fear, now carried the gentle sounds of healing and hope. The brothers moved through the corridors, checking vitals and adjusting treatments with practiced ease. In the recovery ward, they found Georgina Hall sitting upright, her breathing clear and strong. When she saw them approach, tears welled in her eyes. "You boys are angels," she whispered, reaching for Tyler's hand. "Real angels who saved our town." Outside the mansion's wrought iron gates, townspeople left daily offerings: fresh bread, fruit baskets, and handwritten notes expressing heartfelt gratitude. The pile grew steadily, a testament to the community's transformed hearts. At the construction site of the medical center, work resumed with renewed energy. Volunteers hauled lumber and mixed cement, while others painted walls and installed windows. The building, once just Evelyn Ellis's dream, took solid shape under the afternoon sun. Tyler and Mason walked through the pediatric wing, their footsteps echoing on the new floors. They discussed placement of equipment and room layouts, their voices mixing with the sounds of hammering and sawing outside. In another section, Caleb arranged his laboratory space, carefully marking where each piece of equipment would go. The room would serve as both research facility and teaching space, fulfilling dual purposes in their mission of healing and education. Evan and Liam collaborated on the waiting room design, selecting comfortable chairs and cheerful colors. They wanted families to feel welcome and at ease, understanding that healing involved more than just medicine. William Ellis moved slowly through the halls, one hand trailing along the fresh walls. Tears glistened in his eyes as he observed each thoughtful detail. Every room, every corridor seemed to whisper Evelyn's name, as if her spirit guided their creation. That evening, the family gathered in the mansion's dining room for a peaceful meal. Gone were the worried expressions and tense shoulders that had marked their faces for months. Instead, quiet confidence radiated from each brother as they passed dishes around the table. William Ellis looked at his sons with pride. "You've done more than save lives," he said, his voice warm with emotion. "You've restored this community's faith in what's possible when people come together." The brothers shared stories between bites, tales of patients who had recovered against odds, moments of breakthrough during the crisis, and the unexpected kindness they'd witnessed from former critics. Their laughter, genuine and relaxed, filled the room that had once seemed too large and empty for comfort. The morning sun cast a golden glow on the new medical center's pristine white walls. Townspeople gathered in their Sunday best, children clutching bright bouquets, and an air of excitement rippled through the crowd. The building stood as a testament to perseverance, its modern facilities gleaming with promise. Mayor Richard Conway approached the podium, his usual proud demeanor replaced by humble sincerity. He cleared his throat, looking at the assembled faces that had once shared his skepticism, but now shone with hope. "Today we name this facility the Evelyn Ellis Medical Center," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong to doubt her vision and the extraordinary young men who brought it to life." Applause erupted, and tears glistened on many cheeks. Inside the lobby, sunlight streamed through large windows as Tyler addressed the crowd. "This center isn't just ours, it belongs to every life it can save," he said simply, his words touching every heart in the room. Mason proudly demonstrated his medical innovations, explaining how each device would serve the community. Nearby, Caleb led small groups through the laboratory, describing its capacity to identify and prevent future health crises. In the pediatric wing, Evan and Liam guided excited children through colorful corridors. Their gentle voices explained medical equipment in ways young minds could understand, while cheerful murals of healing and hope brightened every wall. Dr. Foster and Dr. Miller watched their students with undisguised pride. These young men had exceeded every expectation, turning tragedy into triumph through their dedication and compassion. William Ellis stood quietly before Evelyn's portrait in the main hall. The artist had captured her kind eyes and warm smile perfectly. Tears welled in William's eyes as he gazed at her image, knowing her dream had finally become reality. As evening approached and families began to leave, many stopped to thank the brothers personally. Former critics approached with downcast eyes and sincere apologies. The brothers accepted each word with grace and understanding, holding no grudges. The setting sun painted the medical center in warm amber light, its windows glowing like beacons of hope. The town that had once rejected these young men now embraced them as their own, united in their vision of a healthier future. Early morning light filtered through the medical center's windows as the brothers moved quietly through the corridors. Their footsteps echoed softly as they checked each room with meticulous care. Tyler straightened medical supplies while Mason adjusted his equipment. Caleb organized medications in pristine cabinets as Evan and Liam arranged cheerful flowers in the pediatric ward. Pausing before a brass plaque, Tyler ran his fingers over Evelyn Ellis's engraved words, "No child should face the world alone." A gentle smile crossed his face as warmth filled his chest, feeling her spirit in every corner of the building. In the afternoon sun, William Ellis sat contentedly on a garden bench, his breathing steady and strong. The medical center's small garden bloomed with healing herbs and bright flowers. Mason and Caleb settled beside him, eagerly sharing their plans for future research projects and medical innovations. Nearby, Evan and Liam discussed ideas for community health workshops, their voices animated as they planned ways to teach preventive care. Tyler stood watching them all, marveling at their journey from frightened orphans to respected healers. "You've succeeded beyond my hopes," William Ellis said softly, his eyes bright with pride. "Not just as doctors, but as a family." The brothers gathered closer around him. "You gave us the chance to belong," Tyler replied warmly, "to become something greater than ourselves." Evening found them in the mansion's cozy parlor, where family photographs now covered once bare walls. Images of Evelyn Ellis smiled down at them, alongside pictures documenting their remarkable journey. The home that had once felt cold and empty now rang with warm laughter and shared stories. They discussed plans for expanding their work, training young apprentices, bringing healthcare to rural areas, continuing Evelyn's legacy of compassion. The sense of purpose and completion filled every corner of the room as they sat together, bound by love, perseverance, and forgiveness. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the Evelyn Ellis Medical Center as 5 brothers stood at its entrance, their white medical coats crisp in the early light. William Ellis walked slowly behind them, his face beaming with fatherly pride. His heart condition, now well managed, allowed him these precious moments. Townspeople gathered spontaneously on the path leading to the center. Their quiet applause filled the air, a far cry from the skeptical whispers of the past. Small children darted between adults' legs, their laughter light and carefree, no longer shadowed by fear of illness. By midday, the brothers worked in perfect harmony inside the center. Tyler coordinated patient flow, while Mason checked vital signs with his refined instruments. Caleb reviewed lab results as Evan and Liam tended to a child's scraped knee. These were simple cases now, routine checkups, minor colds, small injuries that needed gentle care. The devastating epidemic felt like a distant memory. "Remember to take your vitamins," Evan reminded a young mother kindly. "Prevention is better than cure." Liam demonstrated proper bandaging technique to an attentive father, while Mason explained how his latest diagnostic tool worked to a curious elderly patient. Late afternoon sun streamed through the windows as the family gathered around the newly installed bronze statue of Evelyn Ellis. The statue captured her gentle expression perfectly, her eyes seeming to look down with approval at the bustling medical center below. William Ellis turned to his sons, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would be so proud. You've taken her dream beyond what she could have imagined." Tyler's response came softly, filled with love. "We did it together. As a family." Mason, Caleb, Evan, and Liam nodded in agreement, their eyes glistening with gratitude. The 5 brothers linked arms with William Ellis, walking toward the center's exit together. Behind them, townspeople cheered warmly, celebrating the family that had transformed their community through healing and hope. If you enjoyed the story of William and 5 brothers, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.